There is nothing called work-life balance which is valued in our country. The harder you work, the more efficient you are, the more money you make is the scenario that's been going on. I will not take names, but some of the foremost industrialists in this country on the technological domain said, oh, we were working 74 hours, 75 hours in a week. Youngsters must work 75 hours to build an ecosystem in this country. I totally disagree. A youngster must work a 9 to 5 scenario, provided a 9 to 5 scenario is work. If you're looking at a 6-day week, unfortunately, most professions and practices don't operate on a 5-day week. Even if it is a 6-day week, even under the labor legislations of this country, it is a 54-hour week. The best time, I think, to bring the right to disconnect was when India was moving away into a global economy in the 1990s. That should have been the time when you brought the right to disconnect. What is the second best time to bring the right to disconnect? Today.
So, sir, there's conversation about the fact that how many hours should you work in a week? There are many people who argue that we should have a far more efficient working culture. Then this generation of millennials and Gen Z is arguing that they have a right not to connect with their employers after certain working hours. And we're discussing the right to disconnect. Litigation as a profession known for long working hours, is that something which is possible?
Oh, absolutely yes. I may be looked at as an outlier of saying this. I've been in the litigation domain now for more than 3 decades. Worked as a lawyer who do the drafting, filing and arguing until I got designated 10 years ago. I'm now working as counsel for the last 10 years, not drafting and filing anything, but only arguing. I've been with a law firm when Poovayya & Co. was the firm that I worked with, played the role of being a managing partner, and then I've quit the firm after designation, and I'm today an independent counsel with no affiliations to any firm. Now, in this entire array of legal work, if you ask me, will the right to disconnect efficiently work? Answer is absolutely yes, it will. The problem is, I don't think we have the maturity to implement it. And there is a tendency, if I can call it so, in this country particularly. If you work hard, you are good. If you overwork yourself, you are better. That your love for the profession is demonstrated on the number of hours that you will work and burn yourself to death. That's the commitment to the profession. You know, lots of comments that I've heard when I joined the bar 30 years ago is, oh, law is not a profession, it's a passion. You need to make sure that you're 247 in it. I personally believe that attitude is absolutely incorrect. You bring in efficiencies, provided you have a particular discipline of working at a particular time. And in today's world, you then leverage on technology to ensure that your work happens seamlessly, whilst at the same time, you have an effective right to disconnect that you can practice. Right to disconnect does not mean that the organization or the employer cannot really send you a request or send you a work requirement by an electronic means during that time. They can. Right to disconnect means that you are not obligated as an employee or you are not obligated as a lawyer in a firm to respond to that query or to respond to that issue which has come to you electronically outside your working hours. Therefore, a query can come to you at 10 o'clock in the night, no problem. But you are not expected to respond to it at 10:30 in the night. You are expected to respond to it in the next working session, which possibly may be 9 o'clock next morning. That is the right to disconnect.
That takes me to a paradigm where I wonder that when, work was about going to a factory and physically working, you had 8 or 9 hours and then your shift ended and then nobody got in touch with you because the modes of communication did not exist at this point. Now it's not about manual labor. Now it's about your intellectual labor, how much you're contributing, and you also have multiple modes of communicating with each other, and lines have blurred drastically. That is why you see work fatigue, chronic work fatigue and mental fatigue setting into this generation, and they're not being able to take care of it. Would it be correct to say that technology has facilitated a culture where there are no boundaries between the personal and the professional? Because you've seen both the eras.
I will answer that. Yes, when I started my career, we did not have a computer to actually undertake word processing. We had manual typewriters with manifold papers, 1+5 is typed, and then it would be manually couriered to the client in some other city. They would make changes, it would be couriered back. Fax machines were actually the cutting edge technology then. From where you started with a black telephone number booking trunk calls to where you are today in an absolutely networked world has been a paradigm shift. But please don't blame technology for the fact that there is pressure of work because there is a technological connect and the whole ecosystem is today connected. Please blame the culture of expecting people who work for you to be available for you 24/7, to respond to your query come what may at whatever time, and sugarcoating it to saying that if a person really responds to you within 5 minutes of an email being sent to him or her response to you makes her efficient or makes him efficient, which is, according to me, a total anathema. The problem with our country is that our employers do not have the maturity to ensure that they don't expect their employees to communicate to them beyond office hours. There is nothing called work-life balance which is valued in our country. The harder you work, the more efficient you are, the more money you make is the scenario that's been going on. I will not take names, but some of the foremost industrialists in this country on the technological domain said, oh, we were working 74 hours, 75 hours in a week. Youngsters must work 75 hours to build an ecosystem in this country. I totally disagree. A youngster must work a 9 to 5 scenario, provided a 9 to 5 scenario is work. If you're looking at a 6-day week, unfortunately, most professions and practices don't operate on a 5-day week. Even if it is a 6-day week, even under the labor legislations of this country, it is a 54-hour week. As you rightly said, in a physical domain, in a factory, you would have a 9 to 5 scenario for 6 days a week, and thereafter you are gone, you are not connected. You had some time for yourself. If that's the scenario, why can't you permit your employees to work those 54 hours at whatever point of time it may be and have the right to disconnect thereafter? France has it in place. Multiple European countries are actually looking at bringing that scenario where, as I said, there is no restriction on the employer sending out a query, maybe electronically, etc. at any point of time, because queries may be such that it will come in. But there is a restriction on the employer expecting the employee to respond beyond working hours. And that right to disconnect is actually paramount. When our country was $500 billion economy, I understand that all right, possibly in a non-tech world, we were expected to work harder, build. We are today, in terms of purchasing power parity, a $14 trillion economy. In terms of nominal capital, we are a $4 trillion economy. You still, after being a $4 trillion or a $14 trillion purchasing power parity economy, you still don't value the right to disconnect. You still want to make sure that your employees work 24/7, they burn out, they have mental issues, they do not have social bonds with people, they do not have time for their family, they just do not have time to think, recuperate and rejuvenate. How can you build an effective human resource capital if you don't provide them the right to disconnect? Look at the Bible. Even the Bible had Sabbath. That during Sabbath you turn up and say, all right, that's the time for me to disconnect. Now, if the biblical notions had it, now come on, network world of this nature, why can't this country provide every employee, irrespective of the vertical in which they are working, the right to disconnect? I think that's the order of the day. Ms. Sule, I think, brought in a private bill. Supriya Sule, I think, initiated a private bill on the right to disconnect in this country, but unfortunately that went nowhere.
Coming to the laws around it, there are labor laws that exist in this country. There are state government laws and codes that are there, but none of those laws are in sync with the reality of today, that in technological times there's no 8-hour work schedule, you can contact each other anytime. Is India ready for a legislation or a code where right to disconnect in some form also has the legal sanction and validity? Because right now it is only a force of a moral argument, perhaps.
No, absolutely correct. If India could pioneer itself through the Information Technology Act in 2000 and the amendments in 2009, the Digital Ethics Code in 2021, if India can be in the forefront of governing tech businesses in terms of competition, antitrust, etc., if India can become one of the fastest growing startup ecosystems in the world, if India can actually produce as many unicorns, if Indian tech companies can service the world, how can we even ask ourselves the question that is India ready for a tech-enabled legislation which gives the people in this country the right to disconnect from work? How will you modulate it? How many hours, etc. are all absolutely questions that there can be a debate, there can be a discourse and you arrive at it. But the problem for us is most labor legislations were promulgated at a time when brick and mortar business was the be all and end all. Those labor legislations do not even have a whiff of technology in them. And therefore, whilst the labor code was brought in, and in the labor code, which is still not in force in this country, there is a semblance of the right to disconnect coming in, that legislation is not being implemented. So is India ready? My answer is India was ready 15 years ago. The best time I think to bring the right to disconnect was when India was moving away into a global economy in the 1990s. That should have been the time when you brought the right to disconnect. What is the second best time to bring the right to disconnect? Today. And therefore, if we don't do it, we will simply ensure that our workforce dissipates itself. Our mental health issues in this country simply lead to a situation where it becomes an epidemic, and efficiencies in our system will be horrendous. I would request the older people in the industry not to really bring up that scenario of saying, oh, if you work 72 hours, you are a hero. If you work 72 hours, there is something wrong with you. You need to work at a particular time, be efficient about the work. The idea is result. So long as you are result oriented, you need not log your time to saying higher the time, the better it is. Absolutely not. That's, I think, a wrong paradigm.